Hey everyone, welcome back with Beano Mac, where today we're going to start our playthroughs of the arcade modes in Mortal Kombat Armageddon here. And we're going to start off with Drahmin, and Drahmin is someone that I always thought had a really cool concept going for him, as far as, you know, being a guy who went mad in the Nether Realm, and eventually turned into an Oni, which is what Drahmin is. Usually hangs out with Mohawk, and they usually get up to hijinks and hooliganism. Although that said, this outfit, I really like the look of this outfit, but he's supposed to not be wearing the mask, but for some reason he is, so I don't know what the deal is with that. He's not somebody I usually play as, but I figured, you know what, I'm gonna just kind of play as like a whole bunch of different characters for Armageddon, since, you know, it is a game with, you know, 64 playable fighters, the largest Mortal Kombat roster by a wide margin. And I don't know, I think the concept of Armageddon is really awesome, just having all the returning fighters. It really irritates me when people call it, like, I've heard people call this the asset dump. And I mean, I just don't agree with that assessment. The obvious implication is to kind of have, like, it was essentially what Mortal Kombat Trilogy was at the time. It was just getting every single character that could get into the game that had ever been playable into the game, and, you know, for one big monster kind of thing. And I don't know, people, they complain about Mortal Kombat Trilogy, people complain about Mortal Kombat Armageddon, and I will say this, I've always defended, ooh, that was a crazy move, but I've always defended Armageddon in the past, and I still do think it's a great game, and will always be a fantastic game in my opinion. But there are definitely a lot of things that I do have to acknowledge. Is first off, the creative fighter, totally broken. I'm not going to be playing as any creative fighters in any of these playthroughs, by the way, just to let you know. But they are incredibly broken, and, you know, that was just probably due to timing, I'm sure, and not being able to fully implement it properly. It's too bad it never came back, but it was probably a big reason as to why, is because people complained about it. So not necessarily means that I agree with Mortal Kombat if that is the reasoning as to why it's never came back, because if it's a really awesome concept, but if it doesn't work, I think it just would have been really cool for them to have just brought it back in a different way, you know, and try and, you know, fix the issues rather than, you know, I hate when gaming companies, you know, you complain about like a feature or something that was included, and instead of trying to make it better, they just say, alright, well, it seems like people don't want this then. You know, almost as like a screw you to the consumers for having the nerve to complain. And once again, I do want to even just say that I don't think that that's what the case is for Mortal Kombat not having creative fighter back, but that's just, you know, it's a possibility for all we know. But I don't think like Ed Boon would be that kind of pettiness. And in a way, you know, it wasn't creative fighter, but, you know, they had creative variations and stuff like that in Mortal Kombat 11, so I mean, you could say in a way create you know, custom parts and stuff like that. Definitely came back in some way, shape, or form. Creative fatality system is something I agree with the people in which, yeah, I don't know. I would have preferred everybody just had one fatality, but obviously that just wouldn't have been the case. I feel like if this game had like another year to cook in the oven, I think this game's reputation would be perceived a lot differently. You know, for bug fixes, you know, creative fighter could possibly be better and more balanced. You know, maybe everybody could have potentially gotten a fatality, but that said, I think that seems like the biggest issue with it is obviously you can have creative fatality on everybody, but I think, you know, fatalities on the big guys probably would have been the biggest issue as well. But once again, I honestly do believe this game could have been one of the greatest of all time if they just had another year to cook, as they say. But I don't know, what do you guys think? Do you think it would take more than a year to be able, an extra year is what I'm saying, more than an extra year to be able to get this game in working order, or do you agree with that assessment? Because it was, I'm sure they were working on it at the same time Shaolin Monks, you know, came out and stuff like that, because like Deception, for example, that got 2 years, you know, from 2002 to 2004. You know, Deadly Alliance was 2002, Deception was 2004, and then Shaolin Monks was 2005, and Armageddon was 2006. So maybe if they just had an extra year exclusively working on Armageddon, they could have gotten it in a much bigger working order. But that said, what we do have, you know, something that does bother me is like the stiffness. It's just and it's not just with Armageddon. There's kind of like with all the 3D era fighting games that I kind of never realized when I was growing up as a kid. There's kind of like when you end combos and stuff like that at times, it's just like your character completely stops. And it's very irritating, and it doesn't happen to like CPUs or anything like that. But like, for example, if I'm hitting a combo and I finish it or whatever and they block me, and I look to try and block myself after the combo, you know, they hit me with it. Because my character takes like literally a full second before, you know, they can start blocking again for some reason. And, you know, that is definitely usually never the case when it comes to CPUs, as you can tell. You can notice that like when I block an attack, and I go for a counter attack, they have the ability to, you know, a lot of times just block my attacks regardless anyway. So I don't know if that's something, you know, like the cheap AI that they wanted to portray or anything like that, but definitely something that bothers me about this series. I also think some of the added elements in this game, like air fighting, like, let's be honest, that was never going to be like a big feature of the game, and something nobody really ever talks about or anything like that. So I don't know, I feel like that's something that we could all have done without. And maybe if they hadn't done air fighting, that would have been able to help contribute to a overall better gaming system. Especially, it's a new feature that they were trying to implement, and I think that's where a lot of the glitches that the competitive community complains about really comes from. So, but I usually don't really take what the competitive community has to say too seriously, because obviously they don't speak for the casual gamer. And, you know, I love the fact that this game has Mortal Kombat as well. Conquest, I think, is really great. A lot of people, for some reason, the thing is, I feel like when like there's bad things about a game, people will go above and beyond to try and make their point even worse. So for example, for like Conquest mode in this game, I think is fantastic. But I think that a lot of people, they say, oh, well, it was a ripoff of Shaolin Monks, and it's a worse version of this or that. I can kind of somewhat see the influences with it, but to me it seems more in line of like what Deception would be like if they had fighting mechanics implemented into it as well. So there definitely was stuff that they took from Shaolin Monks, but to say that it was trying to copy Shaolin Monks and that, you know, it's just an inferior version, I just kind of don't really see that comparison personally. And I think it's, you know, I really like Conquest mode for what it is, and, you know, the collection aspect, the story, playing as a new character, Taven. I think the combos are much different, and I think the fatalities, the way that system works, is pretty cool as well. Not as good as Shaolin Monks, of course, but once again, this is not a dedicated game in that sense like Shaolin Monks was, you know what I mean? But I thought Conquest mode was very fantastic, just like, you know, Conquest mode was fantastic in Armageddon, or Deception as well. So I think there's a lot of good to this game, but I think when people focus on some negatives, they try and conjure up, you know, other negatives that aren't really always there. The Elder God, collecting all the Elder God pieces in Conquest, though, I mean, I always thought that was kind of like weird and silly, and I never really understood, like, it doesn't even feel like Elder God pieces, because I would think, you know, it's just gold armor. There's not really anything else that's special about it, you know, kind of, I guess it kind of somewhat resembles a dragonish type design, but I don't know, I think they could have done a lot better job of it, and I would have preferred some other sort of collectible other than the Elder God stuff, but it's something, you know. But overall, I think Armageddon is a very enjoyable experience and still holds up pretty decently well, especially if you're in for a casual playthrough with friends, you know, like me and my buddies, you know, when we're playing this, we usually play this because you have everybody to play as, you know, and it's just a good fun time. You can play as the big giant bosses and everything else like that. So even my brother was very surprised to see at one point that Armageddon, he thinks it's the best Mortal Kombat game of all time, so he was surprised to see how negatively received it was. But that said, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe. Check out next week's playthrough, but above all else, please remember to have a nice day.
The energy of Blaze unlocked the life force residing within Drahmin's mask. Unable to remove it, Drahmin became possessed by it and grew to 3 times his original size. The power of the mask also fueled the rage within him. Unable to contain his fury, Drahmin turned on his former ally, Moloch, in an epic battle of demons. Moloch was defeated, but Drahmin's bloodlust has only just begun.